Hello, and welcome to my office. I am Mopman, and today we will be collecting ballistics data. The cartridge we will be testing today is the Remington Golden Saber Defense 124 grain 9mm brass jacketed hollow point. This cartridge is standard pressure. Remington is also kind enough to give us some ballistics data on the side of the box, shown here in the top left-hand corner of the screen. Remington claims that at the muzzle they can achieve a velocity of 1,125 feet per second, and with a little bit of math we can extrapolate the kinetic energy to be 348.4 foot-pounds of force. Sadly, Remington does not tell us the barrel length they use to achieve those values. So, let's see if they are using a barrel length people would typically use for everyday carry. Thus our objectives today are 1. Figuring out what barrel length Remington used to achieve its listed velocity, and 2. How effective Remington's Golden Saber is in our gel test. Now, when it comes to testing this cartridge, I'll be shooting it through 2 firearms. As always, and for the sake of consistency between tests, I will be shooting the Golden Saber out of my Wilson Combat SFT9 with its 4¼ inch barrel. Then I will follow that test up with shots from my P365X macro with its 3.1 inch barrel. Doing things this way allows me more control over the variables and hopefully creates more comparable data sets between videos. Also, to anyone wanting to know, yes, both pistols were made clear and safe before the start of the video. Now, shortly, we'll be heading to the range to record our velocity data with my lab radar. As usual, I'll be standing approximately 15 yards away from the targets and shoot each one 10 times. The first string of 10 shots will come from my SFT9, and then the next 10 will be from my P365. Afterward, we will come back to the office and review the data. See you at the range. For you, that transition was fast, but for me, it took a bit longer because life got in the way. However, we finally made it to the range, and it's now late afternoon. As I drove up here, I saw quite a few people shooting, so please excuse any gunfire you'll be hearing in the background. I've gone on ahead and set up my first target, and I'm standing approximately 15 yards away from it. So starting with my SFT9, let's see how these first 10 rounds fare. $1,111. $1,136. $1,147. $1,155. $1,145. 1,008. $1,151. 1,117. Unfortunately, my lab radar only captured 8 out of the 10 shots. So, to complete the data set, here are 2 more shots. $1,148. And 1,173. This target is not bad, but not good either. And I did have an issue with the ammo. I'm not sure if it is rare enough to get a weak round, but one of my shots was very anemic at 1,008 feet per second. It felt weird, and I had a malfunction that needed clearing immediately after I shot. The malfunction may have been my fault, as my thumb sometimes rides the slide, but it is still strange nonetheless. Anyway, putting that aside, it looks like we have a winner for the barrel length Remington used to get its data listed on the box. But I will cover that a little later on after we get our data from the P365. So, let's put up a new target and run the test again with my P365. $1,070, $1,117, $1,096, $1,063, $1,093, $1,071, $1,086, $1,120, $1,090, and $1,110. Much better this time around. I will say my P365 liked the Golden Saber a lot more than my SFT9 did. It had zero malfunctions and the group looks much better than my SFT9's, aside from a few flyers, and those were just me. I also didn't experience another abnormally weak round, so hopefully that was just a fluke. For now though, let's head back to my office and review the data. We'll start by reviewing our range data, though not everything displayed on screen will be discussed. The additional information is provided solely for your convenience. Our findings have definitely answered the question about the barrel length Remington used to achieve its listed velocity on their box. Based on our tests with the SFT9, it is highly likely Remington used either a 4-inch barrel or a 4¼ inch barrel to achieve its listed velocity of 1,125 feet per second. The average velocity recorded for the SFT9, including the anemic round, was close to Remington's at 1,129 feet per second. However, if we exclude that weak round, the average velocity increases to 1,142 feet per second. This higher value aligns more accurately with what we would expect as the abnormally weak round drags down our data set. If we did the test again, a higher average velocity would be expected for the SFT9. This is one of the failings of doing testing with just a sample size of 1. This higher value more accurately reflects what we'd expect as the abnormally weak rounds use the data downward. If we repeated this test, we would likely observe a higher average velocity. This emphasizes why tests with a sample size of 1 are generally considered unreliable. For it to be more accurate, it must be repeated many times and show a trend. However, it is unreasonable for me to test to that degree, as I don't have the capability to do so. So, with that said, let me get off my soapbox. Personally, I think Remington used a 4-inch barrel to get the box's listed velocity. So, what about the rest of the data for the SFT9? For the most part, I would say the Golden Saber is par for the course when it comes to standard pressure rounds. Its average velocity is the aforementioned 1,129 feet per second, with a standard deviation of 46.29 feet per second, and a percent deviation of 4.1%. The extreme spread is rather massive at 165 feet per second, but that is to be expected when factoring in the anemic round. Things do change a little when we get to the kinetic energy portion. We see an average kinetic energy of 351 foot-pounds of force and a standard deviation of 27.5 foot-pounds of force. But the percent deviation is underwhelming, sitting at 7.8%. The extreme spread is also not good either, as it sits at 99 foot-pounds of force. So to put things in perspective a little more, let's do a comparison of the Golden Saber's data next to that of the HST. The average velocities between the two are not far off from each other, as the HST held a velocity of 1,141 feet per second to the Golden Saber's 1,129 feet per second. However, that gap narrows to nothing when the anemic round is thrown out for the Golden Saber. a 1,142 feet per second for the Golden Saber to the 1,141 feet per second for the HST out of the same firearm. I find that result to be rather interesting. The HST seems to beat the Golden Saber in terms of consistency, as it has a lower standard deviation, extreme spread, and percent deviation. The relationship between the HST and the Golden Saber in terms of kinetic energy will closely mirror their relationship in average velocity. It makes sense, though, because if a round beats another in terms of velocity metrics, all things being equal, it must beat it in kinetic energy also. This applies only if the same gun was used and the bullet weights are the same, and both are the same in this case. The Golden Saber and HST are 124 grain bullets, and they were both shot from my SFT-9. The HST wins in terms of kinetic energy, standard deviation, percent deviation, and extreme spread. Now let's see how the P365 did in the same test. The P365 didn't seem to have any of the same hiccups the SFT-9 did. We didn't get that oddly anemic round, and everything functioned about how you would expect it to. The velocities were obviously less than that of the SFT-9, garnering an average velocity of 1,091 feet per second, with a standard deviation of 20 feet per second, and a respectable percent deviation of 1.8%. And the extreme spread was 57.6 feet per second. Then, when it comes to kinetic energy, the Golden Saber managed 327.5 foot-pounds of force, with a standard deviation of 12.2 foot-pounds of force, and a percent deviation of 3.7%, and rounding out an extreme spread of 35 foot-pounds of force. So, with all the technical details out of the way, let's compare all this with the HST's data. Here, the HST scored an average velocity of 1,071 feet per second, but was slightly edged out by the Golden Saber by 30 feet per second. This is not much, but it shows how close the cartridges can be to each other. The Golden Saber also came out on top in every other metric relative to the HST, but if the tests were held again, the results may flip as the margins are very close to one another. Nothing here says one round is so much better than the other based on paper's statistics. In fact, the kinetic energy of the Golden Saber sees the margins narrow even more, netting a 327.5 foot-pounds of force, whereas the HST managed 315.62 foot-pounds of force. So let's see how accurate I was with the cartridge. Here's my target from the SFT-9 test. As mentioned earlier, the performance was decent but not exceptional. I feel the SFT-9 could have performed better if I had run the test again, but unfortunately I didn't have enough ammo for a second round. I scored a 93, but the shots were somewhat scattered and it wasn't my best performance overall. I'm unsure whether the spread was due to my shooting or the specific round I have used. On a positive note, the recoil with the SFT-9 was actually quite light, and I appreciated that. However, I did experience one malfunction during the test. It also seemed like my SFT-9 wasn't entirely compatible with this particular round, as it felt like the slide was sluggish when closing after each shot. Now, when it comes to P365's target, I did slightly better, scoring a 94. However, I did have a good number of flyers. Much like with the SFT-9, the P365 had a rather mild recoil, but it did lack the sluggishness of the slide, making it much more pleasant to shoot in that regard. Aside from the flyers, we achieved a much better grouping of shots within the 10 ring. This suggests that most of the accuracy issues likely stem from the shooter rather than the cartridge itself. So, with those details out of the way, let's head back to the range and run our gel block test. Here we are back on the range, with two 10% ballistics gel blocks set up and ready to go. The first block is set up with my clothing barrier, while the second serves as a simple catch block. The clothing barrier, as always, consists of 2 cotton sheets sandwiched between 2 denim sheets. The sheets are designed to interrupt the bullet's ability to expand in the gel by clogging the hollow point. So here in a moment, I'll shoot the gel first with my SFT-9, then follow it up with a shot from my P365. I'll be standing approximately 5 yards away from the gel during each shot. Now, let's see what happens. The first shot looks good and stopped a little ways into the second gel block. It looks like the jacket came off the round and exited the gel midway through the first block. Now, let's see what the P365 can do. This shot acted like an FMJ and ran through both gel blocks. So, I'm going to reset everything and shoot the gel again. Now that is much better, as this one stayed in the gel. But the jacket came off again. Sadly though, I was not able to find the jacket for the one shot out of the SFT9, or the round that exited the gel. So, with that out of the way, let's get everything into the light box for a close-up view of the wound tracks. Here we can see the starting points of the wound tracks. The top track was created by the SFT9, while the bottom track is from the P365 round that completely passed through both gel blocks. And the middle track is from the P365 round that remained in the gel. All three tracks show decent cavitation upon entering the gel, though, in my opinion, the SFT9 produced the better looking wound. So, as we start to move along the wound tracks, they diminish a little bit, with the bottommost track dropping off the most. I somewhat expected that outcome since the jacket likely stayed intact due to the hollow point being clawed. However, starting at about 10 inches or so, we can see where the jacket separated from the SFT9's track and exited the gel in its entirety. Then, at 15 inches, we can see perfect separation of the jacket from the second P365 round. From this point forward, each track is marked with a pinprick hole and laced with bits of fabric. The second P365 round came to a rest at 19.5 inches, while the SFT9's round stopped at 20 inches. I would follow the third track to the end of the block, but it just disappears at 18 inches until it exits. With all that aside, let's dig the bullets out and check for expansion and weight retention. Here are both rounds dug out of the gel. On the left is the round fired from the SFT9, while the round and jacket on the right are from the P365. As we can see, the lead cores of each round experienced little expansion, but the jacket on the other hand did experience rather extreme deformation and separation. This may be intentional by Remington, but I don't think it is. Remington did market what the bullet expansion should be on the front of the box, so here's a picture of it for reference. Clearly, that is not the result we got from our gel tests. If I had to guess, the lead cores were filled with cloth, which prevented proper expansion, while the brass jacket expanded freely and eventually separated. So, I'll let you draw your conclusions on what that means. Now, let's move on to weight retention. First up is the bullet fired from the SFT9, and it comes in at 91.1 grains. The majority of the loss is from the jacket separation. Next, we have the P365, which comes in at 90.7 grains. When we add in the jacket, the total weight increases to 123.5 grains. Overall, weight retention is rather poor due to jacket separation. So, let's check bullet expansion. First up is the round fired from the SFT9. Also, I will only be checking the lead core for expansion. The jacket will be excluded and treated as FOD. Our first measurement comes in at 9.22 millimeters. The second is 8.67 millimeters. The third is 8.76 millimeters. And finally, the last measurement is 8.52 millimeters. The average is 8.79 millimeters for the SFT9. Now that is rather ironic. The expansion was less than the diameter of the bullet. Again, we are shooting 9 millimeter. Let's see how bad it is with the P365, as I'm sure it will be even less. The first measurement comes in at 7.67 millimeters. The second comes in at 7.60 millimeters. The third is 7.67 millimeters. And finally, the fourth measurement comes in at 7.85 millimeters. The average for the P365 comes in at 7.69 millimeters. Again, less than the diameter of the bullet itself. This result exemplifies the importance of the clothing barrier when it comes to bullet expansion. So, let's get back to my office for some closing remarks and a quick recap of what we've learned today. In conclusion, we were able to estimate that Remington likely used a 4-inch barrel to achieve the 1,125 feet per second velocity listed on its box. The round did reach respectable velocities for a standard pressure round, but it did have some inconsistency with ammo, as I did have a weak round, but more testing would need to be conducted to figure out if that was just a fluke or not. Now, the recoil was not bad for the P365, but was oddly sluggish for the SFT9. I also experienced a malfunction with the SFT9 while shooting the Golden Saber, but that could have easily been due to user error rather than an issue with the round. However, when it came to the most important part of the test, Remington could not stand up to scrutiny. The gel test showed jacket separation for 2 of the rounds fired, and a full pass-through of both gel blocks for the third. I believe Golden Saber would likely expand as Remington claims on the box if it were fired into bare gel. But that is just my personal opinion and superfluous to our testing. Overall, the Golden Saber could not properly expand due to the clothing barrier, and that can cause some rounds to act like F&Js. We saw that today with the round that went through both gel blocks. This leads me to believe that the Golden Saber is an inconsistent round. Personally, I wouldn't choose it for self-defense because over-penetration seems likely, and that is a risk I'm not willing to take. However, like always, ammo selection is a personal choice for anyone, and I am by no means suggesting someone should or should not use this round. My objective is to be as honest and data-driven as possible, to prevent any kind of personal bias from getting in the way. So, with everything being said, do your research and find something that works best for you. And with that said, that is all I have to say about the Remington Golden Saber Defense 124 grain brass jacketed hollow point. I wish you all well, and if you stuck around this long, thank you for listening to me ramble. That's about all. I'll see you next time.